One. What's really going on, everyone? Back again with another special episode. Before we get into our very, very special guest and this very, very unique topic, be sure to follow us on all of our social media. That includes Twitter, Instagram, and X for me. Wait, what did I say? Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. There we go. Butchering already. A little rusty. On at WRGO Pod. Be sure to check us out. All of our live links, including YouTube, where our subscribers are going crazy. So thank you for that. Be sure to check us out on linktree.com/WRGO. And I will let Henry introduce our very special guest since he was the one who set this up.
Yeah, we have Guyesha Blackshear here. She's an economist and financial wellness entrepreneur. She is the executive director of Scholars and Knowledge, where she's developed and delivered comprehensive educational programs that have impacted students. She's sponsored by Spelman's College Bonner Scholars Program. Guyesha received her bachelor's from Spelman and then her master's degree from Georgia State. She runs a popular media platform, the Journal Junior, Economics, and where she provides commentary, current events, and policy changes. Guyesha, welcome on, and feel free to add anything to that introduction.
No, so you did it perfectly. So thank you for the warm welcome.
Awesome. Well, I guess we can just start. I mean, today, as we're recording, it's June 27th. There is a presidential debate in about 1 hour. How do you feel the president and their policies can actually impact the economy for the average voter, given that you study this as, from the economic side? How do you feel whether it's Biden's policies or historically that a president can actually impact the economy or the average person's kind of view of it?
I think that is a huge issue in which that we all should be paying attention to, including what type of policies in which that could possibly impact your day-to-day spending, and as well as what each administration objectives is, especially when it comes to planning for the future, such as with Trump, how everybody has heard of Project 2025 and just his team in general. They plan to just strike down all the progress in which that we've made when it comes to things such as energy transition. However, the Biden administration is going full force with the investment, such as with the infrastructure package in which that he passed last year. So therefore, I think that when it comes to the average voter, you just have to really understand what your priorities are, but also look at, the outcomes of each administration. Yes, with Trump, you may have felt richer because of the stimulus package. But that was going to happen anyway because of the state of the world. However, right now, Biden is creating policy for the future, such as incentivizing on electric car makers to continue to produce, which is creating jobs and as well as keeping us at the forefront of the world economy. So
Can you can you
that.
actually talk about, because I think it's actually very, and we've talked about this a lot, of how obviously people kind of think that quote unquote Trump's economy was good largely because of the stimulus, but I also think that kind of breakdown is kind of it represents a larger problem, and that a lot of people do not actually feel that kind of day-to-day interaction of this thing happens that impacts me directly. Can you talk to kind of how it's smart? In hindsight, it was very smart for Trump to kind of brand the stimulus as his, because I think whether he knew it or not, people don't really have one thing that impacts their lives from an economic side, given that the tax policy went through and a lot of people would get less kind of tax refunds that they used to before Trump signed it. So can you talk about kind of how that aspect of kind of hey, Trump's economy, which is kind of, as you can probably tell better than us, is very much so flawed, but he takes credit for this one thing. I just think it's very interesting.
Absolutely. And I think that he should take credit for it. For the simple fact that at one point people were making more than which they had ever made in their lives weekly, such as especially with the extra $600 added on top of unemployment, and as well as some people were either legally or illegally going to get the PPP loans. So therefore he can so he definitely can.
For multiple reasons, but I'm glad you're hitting these points. I don't want to cut you off though. I have a habit of doing that, so I'm gonna let you cook and then I'm gonna jump in.
No, not a problem. But I think that he absolutely should take credit for doing that. And mind you, is that like when it comes to like economics, I don't like to get political at all because I think that at the end of the day, both sides have said things in which that are just not feasible. So therefore, I think that like, I mean, of course he should. He put money in people's pockets. He also ensured the fact that manufacturers would also continue to produce and run. But we also have to acknowledge the fact that, yes, he can take credit for the fact that a lot of people felt richer and then they were richer relatively. However, what's going on now is the aftermath of all of that stimulus, such as with people being laid off, housing prices being ridiculous, and as well as the fact that the Fed is just like, look, we're still waiting for things to cool off before we start cutting because of what y'all did in the last 3 years, or rather what policy did in the last 3 years. So, yeah.
You kind of hit on this a little bit before, but why do you think it's important as voters and as citizens? Like I live in New York City and I see all of Biden, the infrastructure plan that he had or the bill. I was riding the train and I thought that that was honestly cool to see that I like him incentivizing cities to build within and build up the infrastructure because I do feel like as a country, we're kind of behind compared to when it comes to mass transit and all of these things. So my question is, why do you think it's important when we think about what voters should look for and what are, I guess, green flags of voters should look for? Like when we talk about Trump and stimulating the economy, he can take accountability for that. But with Biden, I feel like with this plan with infrastructure, it's not something that can be completed within his term, but that is something that I would think is a green flag that people should kind of consider when they are going to the polls. So why do you think that that's important for voters to kind of focus on?
I think that's greatly important. So I'm just going to take an event that just happened here in Atlanta, such as I'm not sure if you all heard about like the Atlanta water pipe crisis. So with plans such as Biden's, whereas he said, okay, with this infrastructure plan, because most of the bridges, pipes, or what have you, and even like the electrical grid, all of this is like super old. So therefore, let's invest this money in order to update these things to prevent events such as like in Atlanta from happening. So therefore, when you have a president in which who is more so when you have a presidential candidate at this point who is more so future focused, rather than just, okay, you're struggling today, I'm going to cut taxes for you today. So you should vote for me because of the fact that because of the money in which that you're going to save today. Okay, but what about like the inconveniences that could occur tomorrow? You see what I'm saying? Like that. So with that being said, I think that that's like one of the green flags in which that people should look out for is that like, is this person future focused? And also another thing I would say is that when it comes to such as like when they start making, I would say very slightly delusional plans about when it comes to like the economy, is this actually feasible? Like, can you really cut? Okay, just for an example too, with the whole Biden student loan promise, right? You know, I mean, like that had people like me, y'all, everybody running like, okay,
Right.
Yeah.
saving me an extra what, $400 to $500 a month, possibly, with student loan repayment. So of course I'm gonna go vote for you. But yeah, we all failed to ask the question of like, okay, is this actually possible? I mean, it was possible for some people, but not all. So
I am curious since we are about to witness the debate tonight. I'm curious, do you have any top 3 random tax or economy things that they're going to try to run on to just say that they're going to do these things? When you talk about making or saying something or running on a promise that you can't keep, do you think that there's anything that you expect to hear tonight, them, randomly saying that they can, I don't know, buy everyone a house in this country,
So I can imagine that Biden is, I think that Trump is probably going to try to attack Biden on, well, although he started the trade war, but also the fact that China is now threatening violence because of the pending trade war, which that they have with the United States. He's probably going to try to run with, let's see.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Oh no. I'm just trying to think. I think that
Noah, Henry, you have any guesses?
In terms of what they're going to talk about, in terms of what they're going to talk
Just
about
like
tonight.
top three, like, okay, I assumed before Biden even came, like student loans, I feel like that's
what I was gonna say.
you could say that you're gonna wipe out. Now, what's a big thing? I would say
the
that
topic,
I'm gonna make rent payments. That put a cap on these landlords and
He's
they
already
can't
talked
raise the
about
rent
that.
for something.
Actually, Mackenzie, I think you just led to a good point because we posted on Instagram that package he
Yeah.
out in housing and all that stuff, or policy, excuse me. He's definitely going to champion that and student loans for sure. For
And the
Trump,
Ticketmaster stuff, not Ticketmaster as a whole, but the junk fees. I feel like he's gonna try to say that he could wipe out junk fees and hold the big corporate bad guys accountable, and we won't have to pay
and
an extra fee or something.
as someone who works
Which is
for
valid, and I would vote for that.
and then as someone who works for the corporate bad guys, yes, he will do that because it polls very, 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 very well.
Yeah,
but I think he'll hit. I think he'll mainly just try to hit on kind of Trump's tax plan. Like I think like the easy kind of out is right there in terms of, hey, this tax plan, and you could speak to this like in terms of just what his tax plan or Trump's tax plan from a couple of years ago actually did in terms of, I just noticed a direct kind of impact on my taxes because obviously it was being funded by those who made a lot more. But could you actually kind of explain that? Because I actually feel like a lot of people don't actually know what that tax bill actually did, or that like
before you do that,
we're funding it. Yeah, go ahead.
I want some background here. Because you done pointed on we talked about the student loans, and me and Noah were talking the other day, and we felt like but he's kind of trying to do it, but it's not as widespread because the only people I know who's actually gotten their student debt forgiven or plan to be forgiven is people that work for the government.
And
So
like education, nonprofit,
that type.
whatever that category is.
So I would definitely like you to speak toward like how you think that may have affected Biden or will affect Biden, considering we're talking about the debate. And then you talked about how Trump made him richer. We live in Atlanta. We know we know how folks be moving. So point though, into kind of how Noah mentioned the tax bill, like a lot. I was in the barbershop a couple weeks ago, and somebody verbatimly said that statement. I had more money under Trump. I ain't voting, or I'm gonna vote for him. So, like for me as a person, I'm focused on that bigger picture type of thing. How do we interact with the day-to-day people, and get them more engaged? So we're like, I hear you, but this is what actually happened in the tax bill, and then I asked about the Biden stuff. I know I overloaded you there.
Okay, so I want to break this down into.
We're like 9 questions there.
Okay, so I want to start with like the tax bill. So to just not complicate things a lot, what Trump's tax bill did is just basically said, hey, you'll have more money on your paycheck today, but yet when it comes to like tax time, which would be bonus time for like corporate people, that's what I like to say, is that you're basically going to get either little to nothing, or you'll just be highly dissatisfied with the amount. Right.
Me.
So with that being said, is that if you're talking to like the average person, I think that is really important to emphasize to them, not only, like I said, like it goes back to like that whole, are these policies future oriented? Like, would you be more so satisfied with having like a little less today? Because what are you really going to go do? Like, what, probably go, I don't know, like go to like just
get a section.
That's what I'm saying.
Ball stunt.
So that's what I'm
saying.
Go
to Linux.
Right, exactly. Like just one extra.
Stay out of Linux, y'all, please.
Get off my city. Get off my city.
So that's what I'm saying. So like, or would you rather have like more at like in like the first quarter of the year? Some people, it's like a mixed bag. So
I'm not gonna lie. I write a lot of I swipe a lot of things depending on me getting that refund. So I'd probably rather have that, but that's just me because I make a lot of promises to myself.
I think all of us are futuristic and understand that, but I definitely know a few people that be like, yeah, I need my money today. So
Again,
I'm
that's
not trying
why
to hear what you're talking about.
I'll argue that because yes, I I'm operating again Atlanta mindset here. Some people will think like that, but then a lot of people look forward to them taxes to get that car, pay down some debt, get their kids right, stuff like that too. So to your point, Guyesha, I know for a fact I've heard a lot of people, I didn't get my tax lump sum that I usually got,
Yeah.
or that joint was way lower than it was, or what the going on, where Biden in there messing it up, but nobody understands what the tax bill actually did.
Exactly. So I would say that if you're explaining this to like the average person or trying to get them on board to vote for Biden, like say, hey, like this was a part of Trump's policies. And then we also have to talk about Project 2025, which is basically trying to wipe out all of your rights. I mean, the fact they're trying to take out the Department of Education, uh, anything when it comes to like DEI is going to be out the window, no abortions, no anything. So therefore it's like, would you rather like, okay, because I feel as if at this point is that like you really have to ask people like, would you rather hand over all of your rights for a little money? Like a little bit more money in your pocket. I mean, because I feel as if that people did it here in Georgia, when it came to Stacey Abrams versus Brian Kemp. They thought, oh yeah, he gave us $1,200. Okay, but you sold your rights away, especially with like his policies in which he's been passing. So, and then mind you, I just have to say this, that I'm not a conservative or a liberal. I'm just saying like, we gotta look at the facts here.
If you were if you were on Biden's team, because I think obviously clearly he struggles with, I think, the kind of the communication aspect of it, specifically to people who look like the four of us on this call. And at the core of it, as you're kind of describing it, these issues are very hard to talk about. It takes time. It takes a lot of like consistent messaging. It takes consistency in terms of actually like what you think is this was actually this. That all takes a lot of time. Time that he might not have anymore. But if you for some reason got the call and said, hey, President Biden wants to talk to you on kind of his economic messaging, what would you recommend he do? Or how would you recommend he do it?
I would recommend that he stop trying to pander to Black people by saying like, you ain't Black, like, if you don't vote for me and what have you, like let's lose like the tactics. Let's go back to, what was it, 20, what was it? Yeah, okay, let's go back to 2020 and when Ice Cube, great such as when Ice Cube, Dr. Claude Anderson, and people really ingrained in like the whole Black economic empowerment movement, we're trying to sit down and talk to you. Let's hear about the Platinum Plan, something in which that Trump and his team were willing to sit down. Well, and then they did sit down with these individuals to talk about. So there's already like a plan in place for you to like
Engage.
follow. So let's implement that now, or at least entertain the thought of implementing. Well, yeah, because at the end of the day, politics is all about images and
Yeah.
perception. So it becomes like one of those things where, okay, yeah, we did talk to them and sit down with them.
Yeah, because I've always wondered that because it just seems like there's so much. I mean, clearly, I think in Mackenzie Henry and I have always talked about this, but clearly they just don't have a lot of Black people on their staff. Because I think the one thing that I'm honestly shocked that he has not done is kind of go after like the building developers and the realtors of like you're overcharging for the expense that a lot of Black people have, which is housing. And I know he's kind of talked about, oh, rent prices and this, but I'm surprised and curious your thoughts what he could actually do in the housing space, given that, you and Henry are in Atlanta. I live in DC, Mackenzie's in New York. These are all areas that are not certainly getting cheaper by the day. And clearly more Black and brown people have probably housing or rent because they don't even own it because it's too expensive as their primary, bulk expense. Is there anything he can even do in the housing kind of sector, or is there, rebates he can give people, or what could he even do to either lower rent prices or housing or encourage people to buy a house? I don't even know that answer, but curious if there's anything that you've seen.
So, okay, that's such a layered question, especially because it's so local. However, I would say that the first step is, especially like if you have like housing markets that are like overpriced and oversaturated, such as like in Atlanta, I recommend that there needs to be some type of regulation put on corporations who are buying up single family homes, which are causing, like we already have like a very limited supply, but we have like very high demand. So when you have an economy where it is cheaper to rent than to own, when usually it's supposed to be like the opposite, So therefore, like when you look at, I think Atlanta's stat was like, I think it was something like probably over 50% or something like that were owned by hedge funds, like single family homes. So therefore,
it's an investment.
Exactly.
It's an investment.
So I feel like there needs to be some type of regulation there first.
Yeah, actually, I think that's even smart because I think, and I know New York has this problem and DC has this problem. There's like the concept of starter homes is kind of like dead. It's either you get like a 5-bedroom home, or like New York is a little bit different. You might be able to get a 1 bed, but it costs like $900,000. But like in DC, there's no such thing as a 2-bedroom home anymore. Or like,
and I'm like, I have so much to say on this because I feel like when it comes to starter home, I completely agree. I think it needs to start at the top with these hedge funds buying up these buildings because that's a problem. That needs to be that shouldn't even be allowed in this situation. I not only say that because people want to buy houses. People are paying cash. If we talk about $900,000 in New York, somebody will come with $950,000 cash and buy a home.
Day.
So that day. So people have the money. People want to spend. There's, like you said, it's a supply and demand issue. That shouldn't even be allowed in this market. I could understand if it was, I don't know. I mean, I work at CNBC, so I see these type of projects all the time when people go into like maybe West Virginia and buy up a place that's abandoned. Cool, sure. But in places with New York, DC, Atlanta, where it's a large population of people of color or just people wanting to buy homes, I don't even think that should be allowed. The other thing I would also say, I think that there's a regulation that needs to be put in place with colleges and how expensive it's becoming, because if we can't wipe out student loans, why are schools starting to become almost $100,000 a year? That's insane. That should not be allowed. You can't wipe out student loans, but you keep letting these, and I wouldn't even say, I know colleges or schools, but it's a large conglomerate. It's still a business. They should not be allowed to charge people 100,000. Like, that's insane. So I think that needs to be a thing as well. And my thing about the starter homes, I could see him doing something like that, like coming up with this new plan. Everybody gets a starter home. But what I'm noticing working at CNBC, the new starter homes are those little tiny homes that are just trailer parks that they're trying to rebrand as a home. And no, because and it makes me mad because it's like, that's how they're gonna do it. That's how they're gonna market it to us. I do believe that they'll come up with a plan to come up with new housing, but it's gonna be them tiny homes. That's a trailer park. And then they're gonna try to rebrand it and make it cool. And no. That's all.
And they're just so cute, and you know how they market.
Yeah, but I'm like, that's a trailer.
And it's like, what? Like, really? Yeah.
To that point, and we speak about Atlanta.
Wait, one more point though, and I feel like it's in Atlanta. No, because there's a tiny house. There was a tiny house cul-de-sac being built, and I want to say it was in Atlanta. It was by a Black guy, and now they're charging like $400,000 for these tiny homes.
Yep.
Well, that's what I was gonna get. That's the average starter home price in Atlanta if you want to move on a decent side of town, 400,000. You might find a 350. And to that point though, like, excuse me, for me, a person that stays in Atlanta, I moved back south with the hope of purchasing a home sooner, but that hope is kind of like disappeared, and to the point of like all these, how the starter homes are changing for us. They're smaller, they're like townhouses, they're smushed together. And then a lot of them, especially in Atlanta, per my investigation, they are owned by these corporations, but they're like rent to own type of situation. So it ends up being like a loophole. Do you have any thoughts there? Because again, as a person a Black man in Atlanta who works in corporate America, I would hope it wouldn't be this hard to obtain a asset, air quote, because yeah.
Well, so one thing which I told people, I said, If you make under $95,000, I would highly recommend you start your home buying process with the NACA program, because you really don't have to put down any closing costs or like any inspection costs or anything like that. And you basically get a mortgage that is affordable to you at your current income level, and also their housing cost maximum limits are pretty high as well. So that's number one, what I like to tell people. However, they will scrutinize your finances for about 6 or so months. So that's just like, one thing about it. And then number two is that, yes, I do have have thoughts about how, the typical route of buying. Well, I do have thoughts about the fact that the typical route of buying a house is hard. But I say that it's by design, right? Because it's like the best way, to increase the barriers of entry into something is to price someone out, and as well as to stifle the job market in this instance. So, but I also love to emphasize too, it's not about if you can do it. Like, okay, yeah, the media sensationalism or whatever, but it's how. And so I tell people go to NACA. And as well as like, I know a lot of states, I know here in Georgia too, they have like a lot of first time home buyer programs to whereas they'll help you out, but you do have to have probably about, a good chunk saved, but it's not impossible, but it is just annoying.
Yeah, they have that in Maryland where you can put zero down, but then after that, it's like you then have, it's either do you want to suffer on the front end or on the back end, and usually then it's like, okay, if you do put zero down, your mortgage is now going to be a lot higher than it was.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and then
Talked about
can you speak to the aspect of housing actually being like the biggest form of investment someone can actually make, and that most people's assets are actually tied to the property that they own? And can you talk about actually just like how important, because the reason why we're talking about homeownership is because it's really important from a financial side, given your expertise. Can you talk about just how important it actually is to own a piece of property?
Well, I say number one, because like when you're paying rent, and if you're like in a prime time market such as in Atlanta, New York, DC, or what have you, you're probably paying at minimum $2,000 a month, but you're paying that to someone else. So, but when you actually are a homeowner, you're basically like putting that money in a pot to yourself. Of course, some goes to the loan, but like some goes also to your equity share, what have you. So with that being said, I just think that it is the cornerstone of wealth building. And I actually just finished reading this book called, I actually have it right here. It's called The Color of Law.
Great book.
Right?
Great book. Great book.
Where basically it emphasizes about how the fact that they intentionally blocked people out of home ownership, because everyone knows that like, I think homes appreciate probably like what 2% each year. So just imagine how that compounds over the years. So therefore they intentionally blocked us out of it because they knew that we would be in this situation today, to where
costing Black families millions in the process.
Exactly. But that piece of property is paramount to wealth building. So yeah, I mean, I can't emphasize it enough. Like,
yeah. I mean, you even think about it, there was a TikToker and he goes around asking people, old people, how much they bought their first house for. And some of them are even ashamed to say in this market. Some of them, I thought this one woman, she said maybe like $400. And now it's worth like 500,000. So just that alone, you can definitely see the appreciation in buying a home. But I like your point about switching the narrative. Like I don't like to sit here and just talk about all the bad things, because it's not about us not being able to, it's just about how. And I think once you start changing your mind frame to that, I can get this, I am able to, I just need to seek out the tools. And thank you for mentioning that program, because I didn't even know about that program. Shoot, a lot of people don't even know about the first time homeowner buyer programs. Like if you really aren't like, if you're not in a situation, like I would say a lot of us are privileged on this call, but if you're in a situation where you don't have people who have bought homes or have property in your family, you might not know of all of the opportunities. and helpful tips that you might have. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that too, because that's one stumbling block in which I previously had with the junior economist, because I'm just like, reporting on the economic news cycle can be so draining and also so depressing, because it's like, trade war here, they just did this or what have you. But I'm just like, what is it that people actually want to hear? Or rather, like, what is actually going to get people to the next step? Or like, what is economics truly about? It's about resource allocation. So how can I help you get to the next step? And I felt as if they're like giving people like the tools on how to better their financial lives, which buys you comfort, access, and like the whole gamut. So, yeah.
And I like that idea because this equity is so much more than just money and a stake in a company. Like you helping someone else get to the next step and passing the torches, having equity within this country, within Black people across the diaspora. So I love that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, like I'm just trying to get people to like really just wake up and just go. Like, I mean, yes, like the media does sensationalize a lot of things, but it's not impossible at all. You just have to have the right information.
I agree with the right information. Before we switch to the fun stuff, I kind of want to like pick your brain a little bit about like just we talked about interest and how Black people may be kind of pushed out of that home buyer process. How do you feel about buying Black, the block? I have a friend who stays in the West End, and he consistently says, if my house was in Buckhead, it'd be like 1.5 million. But down here or near the west side of town, it's a little lower.
Wait, can you explain what that is? What is buying Black? What is
buying Black the block, a Black person buying in a Black neighborhood to increase the equity and just value of that neighborhood.
but he was saying that because he moved in the neighborhood, it
No,
decreased.
his home is in a Black, he has a nice family home, modern home that's on the west side of town that's not as developed as the north side of town. He consistently makes the comment, if his house was on the north side of town, it would be worth way more because of that equity that has developed there. But to the point of Black wealth access, etc., how do you feel about buying Black the block?
I think that you should definitely do that, because I think that it's nothing like, okay, I think that is nothing like having Black people who have not only gone out and acquired some form of wealth, whether it's through entrepreneurship, corporate job, or inheritance for that matter, and then you coming back to say, okay, I'm going to live with my people. But I think that in regards to that, like we should apply that to like every step of our lives. Like I know when it comes to like my skincare, makeup, or anything which I'm going to put on my body, I want that to be made by Black people, because in our community, it is said that our money only cycles through us twice, one or two times, something like that. But when you go to other communities, such as like with the Jews or Asians or what have you, their dollar goes through their community 7 to 9 times before it goes out. So I'm like, we should all be applying that whole um, philosophy when it comes to our dollars, because in order for us to come out of this last place as a people, although we're last place because of policy and like other things which have gone on through history, but we must also think of putting ourselves first economically. So what does that look like? Okay, when I get my paycheck for the first, look, when I get my paycheck, um, instead of renting, I'm gonna own, because then that is going back to me. Um, Instead of ordering my DoorDash or Uber Eats from some other restaurant, I'm going to order it from a Black-owned establishment. So I think that anywhere in which that you can do that is great. Of course, it can be very hard, because I think that Killer Mike showed us that in like his documentary when he tried to like just do everything Black owned, and it was like very hard for him to even like complete that challenge. But I just think that when we just keep ourselves as like, well, applying that philosophy where you can is how we grow stronger as a people. And and also ignoring the noise of when people are just like, see, this is why I don't buy Black owned because they yada. It's like, okay, look, that was your experience. Like, why you gotta count all of us out because of, this one thing happened? So yeah, so that was my thoughts on that.
Yeah. And I'll say also like lean in your community, like in a place like New York, I saw this group. This was during the pandemic when like the houses were like, I guess, more affordable or whatever. And this group of friends, they were coming together to like buy a home. And I thought that like it's only in New York. And yes, I would want to buy my own house. But I love that because I feel like also just as a society, we just kind of moved to like everything is individual. You got to do it by yourself. You can't bring nobody with you. And it's just all of this individuality stuff. And I just feel like, you can help somebody, make a down payment if you have access to that. So like other avenues that I can get to where I want to go, I just might have to lean on my community a lot more than what I'm using and talking to my resources within my own community. So yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that, Mackenzie, because in my current transitional gig right now, I seen a group of YT friends come in and cash out their investment property. They literally, before they went to college, purchased a home together. They all put in on the pot, and they cashed out on it recently. So, like, to that point, we can do this together and like buying back the block. I think that's something I want to do with my friends, and I've kind of tiptoed around the ideal. But I definitely want to, some of them already own investment properties. So I'm like, why don't you bring more of us into the circle so that you can kind of like help, better us in my pockets, but also like we're in Black communities. It wouldn't hurt to be a homeowner in those neighborhoods. So like, I think that's cool that, yeah.
Yeah. And I'll say this last thing, because especially when we talk about keeping the dollar Black, one thing I do like, and I'm sure in Atlanta too, like when I lived in Harlem, it was so easy to keep it in because everything is right there. Anything I needed was Black owned, except for the rent. And that's the thing where I said about coming together and buying property, because in all of the places I've lived in New York, when you talked about how Jewish people keep it in, all of the places are owned by Jewish people. And that's the largest expense, mortgage. If you own them, obviously, if it's a mortgage, you own the home. But renting, your dollar is not like that's the biggest thing. Is that's the biggest expense to keep it within the community. You have to also own property, and I think that goes into like teaming up and doing what you can, because that's also what they do. They team up as a community. They buy these properties and then they rent them out to fools like me that's living in this city.
Well, one thing I was gonna say too is that with the NACA program, and then most of the Black women who I know who are financially well off now, and they did this when they at like the beginning of their career. Through a NACA program, they allow you to buy multifamily homes. And so what you can do with that is that, like say you just like, okay, it'll be nice about my friends, but I just really want my own first. You can like get financed through them, and you can have like your like, you know, you live in one and then the rest of them are like rented out to start like um wealth building process there too. But that's just a thought. Like,
No,
it's way
yeah,
there.
no, and I like what all of you all said, especially that aspect of kind of like leaning into community. Because I do think that there is kind of the stigma to what all of you all were saying was like we need to do it ourselves, but like you know, certainly white people are able to use the benefit of generational wealth in paying for other things that their children and other people do not certainly have. Where it's like, we've all started a job. How many times have we all started a job, made the same thing as someone else, and you're like, how are you living over there? And the question is, oh well, because you got people on the backside who we cannot see helping support that. And it's like that's how that generational wealth is really kind of amplified. It's because we're making the same amount of money, but you were able to get that down payment because we weren't allowed, your people were allowed to buy homes for 100-something years. We were not. So I think that's having actually that conversation, because I think, we're very prideful. And I think we always like to how to do those things by ourselves. But I think leaning into like, it's actually okay to ask your support system, ask your family, hey, I need some money to try to get this house, because there's no way other people our age are able to do that thing without that kind of like safety net. And too often we don't have that, but I think we need to kind of eliminate the stigma of like, yeah, I asked my parents, they helped me for that. This is what it is.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that. Because I wanted to say that when you were speaking, Guyesha, like I think that especially with multifamily homes or starter homes, how we mentioned through the like homeowner buyer process when we were speaking earlier, I think in this society, period, we've lost the ideal of what a starter home actually is, though. Like we think it needs to be that 4 or 5 bedroom house on a certain amount of property, and it doesn't. It can be again buying Black the Block, that smaller house on another side of town that gets you some, just asset to that you can kind of cash out later, is gained an interest, and now you can put that into your second home or third home. I think that's where we like lose it a little bit. I do want to get into the next question because I think we're gonna be talking.
Yeah, we gotta, yeah. Go ahead, Rick.
Nonprofit scholars and dollars, and as we talk about Black people building wealth through home ownership and so on and so forth, what have you like taught them, or what practical financial wellness tips do you give them, and like how do we learn those rules?
So what I basically give people is the foundational steps in which that you need in order to achieve financial wellness. So that looks like teaching you how to budget. Because I know that a lot of people are just like, well, when I get my paycheck, I just spend it, just make sure like the bills are paid and the rest is just vibes. And then when I break it down and say, actually, your budget is just based upon your priorities, such as how like your budget can be like where your expenses not only include like your rent, but also if you prioritize getting like your hair and nails done, then that can be a part of like, that 50%, 50 or 30% split in which that you'll be allocating towards that. I also teach people how to invest as well as how to set up those things properly. We also teach them how to think like an entrepreneur. So you will always have a value creation mindset, whether you plan to use this towards your corporate job and as well as your or through entrepreneurship, because through these steps, so through budgeting, investing, value creation, you're able to not only secure yourself economically, but as well as become an asset to all in which that you touch. And we know that as Black people, since a lot of us are not starting off with an inheritance, most likely climbing the corporate ladder or finding some type of side hustle in which that you're really good at is really going to be where your dollars flow from. So therefore, you may as well become the best at what you do and also understand where to add value. So even if layoffs happen, they're just like, well, we have to keep her or him because, they're a thumb. Where it's like, we can get rid of all these fingers, but yeah, we can't get rid of our thumb because like you can't function your hand without it. So with that being said, the way in which that we allow people to access it is that either you can like come to our free workshops, and we just launched our In Her Bag Summer Bridge program series yesterday, whereas it's a 4-week program, and it's more so and it's targeted towards women who have graduated from college and then where they're about to enter their big girl job or what have you in August or September. And I'm teaching them all of the things in which I wish I had known when I first got my corporate job, especially like, with all the financial mistakes. So, but anybody can come though.
Well, good. Well, we've certainly enjoyed having you. I think we could certainly keep doing this for 2 hours, but I think we're trying to all be respectful of everyone's time. Where can people connect with the Junior Economist or connect with you, so they, if they do have questions, how can people kind of, ask you?
Yeah. Oh, so as far as like with the Junior Economist, you could just connect with me on Instagram or TikTok. TikTok, I'm more responsive. Or through email, which is the JR economist@gmail.com. Or if you are interested in coming to one of our financial literacy workshops, we've got scholars and dollars across all platforms. So, yeah.
Thank you. Well, Guyesha Blackshear, we really appreciate you dropping the most financial knowledge that we've ever had on this podcast. So we really appreciate it. And be sure to check her out and us out on all of our streaming platforms. That is also included. Be sure to check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at WRGO Pods. Guyesha, thank you so much.